Okay, well, so I grew up in Minnesota, Wisconsin area. Did a little stint in Tulsa, Oklahoma for a couple of years.
Did some time there.
But so I was in a small town in Hudson, Wisconsin, where I met my first husband, Tyler. It was small town, let me stress, because I did end up dating a few of his friends before I dated him. There weren't a lot of options, it just...
But you tried all the options, and
I
Tyler
tried
was
all the options.
the
He was the
best.
best one.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we started dating right around the time that I started my freshman year of college, and dated all throughout my college career. And he proposed to me when I was actually studying abroad in Paris. I was studying in London, England, but I was on a little mini break, went to Paris, went to the Palace of Versailles where he proposed to me. So we got married in 2009, and part of our story is adopting our two boys, Elijah and Amos. So we wanted to have kids both biologically and adopt. I always knew I wanted to adopt from a young age, and so that was kind of something that Tyler had to agree on, like early on, like, this better be okay with you? Yep, it's good with me. Okay, great. And so we got married, and we're kind of like, hey, let's just see if we get pregnant. And we didn't. So after a while, we're like, hey, maybe this is God's way of just nudging us towards adoption. And so we started working on, that long process of going through the home study and going through the adoption process. And it was brutal the first time around in adopting Elijah. We had 4 failed matches with birth moms, and one of them that we had been matched for quite a while. We thought we were going to be bringing home a baby girl, and
I remember the story. I remember you talking about it, and so I was not a part of the adoption piece, obviously, with you and Tyler, but from the standpoint of you sharing, you guys had a baby shower. And baby gifts, and you had the room, and you had all of these things all planned out, and then
we were about to leave. The baby was in Texas, and the mom. We were about to leave, and I was about to go on maternity leave. We were going to drive down for the due date and be there for the birth, and we were supposed to leave the next day. We were at work for our final day, and we heard from the adoption agency, and they said, we haven't been able to get a hold of the birth mom for a few weeks. And we were like, what? How has no one told us this? We're about to be there for the birth. So they said, let us work on this. Just wait to hear back from us. Don't go anywhere yet. In a few hours, they called back, and they were like, well, we called around to all the hospitals, and we found out she gave birth 2 weeks ago. And we were like, what?
Wow.
Why didn't she tell us? We had been matched with her for about 5 months. We had gone down to Texas, spent time with her, really worked on developing a relationship throughout that time frame. And so it felt like not a miscarriage, but as close as you could feel without, being pregnant. And we had the baby in our hearts. We were prepared for her. And so it was tough. But from early on as well, I knew I wanted to adopt, and I knew that I wanted this big multiracial family. I just had this picture in my head of the family that I was supposed to have one day, and that was it. And so I believed in it. We kept moving forward, and eventually brought Elijah home. And of course, it was all worth it. I then found out after we brought Elijah home that I was having health issues, and found out that I couldn't actually have babies, and why, and ended up having to get a full hysterectomy at age 29, which was just really unexpected. It was kind of crazy, and it was a tough blow, just knowing I was never going to carry a child, and then starting to question, how am I going to have this big family that I envisioned? Adoption's expensive. We can't do this 7 times, so I'm praying twins, maybe triplets, who knows. But regardless of, having to have the hysterectomy, I knew that God had prepared my heart for it long before, because he gave me this desire to adopt. And so went through that process, and then we started the process for adopting Amos. And that process went so quick and so smooth. I was shocked picking up this baby that we had just been matched with his birth mom 2 weeks prior. So it was like complete night and day opposite from what it had been. This started this crazy season. We brought Amos home. He was failure to thrive. He needed a surgery. Then we ended up selling our home because we had this dream home that a friend of my mom's actually owned, that we had an agreement to buy this house. And so we sold our home. It was Christmas time. We had a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old. And then the agreement with this friend fell through. And so we were homeless with these babies at Christmas, and we're like, what are we gonna do? And so we move into a snowbird's home right next to my parents. They were in Arizona for the winter, and so we moved in, and we're just trying to figure out, where do we go? So we're praying and trying to figure this out. This house smelled like mothballs. It was like living in Grandma and Grandpa's time capsule. And so I was like, I gotta get out of here. So we ended up moving out of that house and into my parents'. And the very next weekend, we went up to my parents' cabin up north, and we were
Like
there
up
as
north.
a
This
family.
is like
Up north,
4
4
hours
hours
north
out,
of Minneapolis, St. Paul.
40 acres out in the middle of really
Thousands
nowhere.
and thousands and thousands of acres of
Yes.
nothing.
Just very up
Forests and
north, Minnesota woods. Where there is a family, we had a wonderful weekend we spent with my parents, me and Tyler and our boys, and then my sister and her her husband and her 3 boys. And one of the traditions we had as a family was to guess which day in the spring all of the ice would finally melt on the lake that my parents' house lived on.
This is
and
one
we
of the
would call this like the ice out bet. And so whoever won the ice out bet would get to pick whatever dinner, no matter how extravagant it is, and we'd have to make it for them. So that year, Tyler had won. And so that Friday night while we were up at the cabin, he had his ice out dinner, and he picked pierogi, and we homemade pierogi. And if you know what it is, it's a labor of love. It's like homemaking ravioli. It's a lot of work. So we did that, and then Saturday was Cinco de Mayo, and it was the Kentucky Derby, and so we had this big like margaritas in Kentucky Derby party. And then Sunday rolls around, and we're doing some yard work as we're gonna head home soon, and Tyler and I are driving around on the side-by-side with Amos, our 9-month-old at the time, in the middle. And Tyler's driving, and all of a sudden just stops and kind of slumps over on me. And I didn't know what was going on. I thought he was just being goofy, or, I'm not quite sure. But I soon realized he wasn't breathing. I've learned now I'm actually terrible under pressure. And so I just screamed for my parents, and they came running and called 911 right away, started doing CPR right away. And it took about 15 minutes for first responders to even show up. I mean, we're this far out in the middle of nowhere. The woman on 911 is instructing us and walking us through and telling us what to do. And we're doing CPR, but nothing's working. First responders come, they take over. Nothing's working. The ambulance finally comes. They're trying everything, doing everything they can. A helicopter comes to airlift Tyler, but he was gone. There was nothing that could be done. He slumped over and took his last breath, and he was gone. And so that was just this incredible shock, where you're kind of like living through the moment, but I was just completely numb in disbelief of what was happening. And our little boys are there just walking around the yard, like not knowing what to do. My sister and her 3 boys, like they're witnessing all of it. We're all just kind of like, what just happened? The beautiful thing is that Tyler loved this land. This was his favorite place on earth. He would say that regularly, and that's where he left us. Honestly, like I envy him going out on such a high note. Like, he was 33 years old. He was happy. He was healthy. There were no No prior signs of any health conditions, anything. I mean, he was kind of the like, you get cut, just rub some dirt on it kind of personality. Like, you wouldn't necessarily know if something was wrong with him or not, but he didn't suffer. And I'm so thankful for that.
And you'd even said that, I mean, the autopsy report was kind of inconclusive or whatnot. I'm sure people are like, well, how did he actually pass away? And what did the person tell you?
So the autopsy was completely inconclusive, but it was essentially like an electrical issue with his heart. The electrical pulse, just stopped, and so his heart stopped beating. The funeral director that was a part of this, like, he had been an EMT prior to becoming a funeral director, and he explained it like, hey, if someone unplugs a lamp and then you see that it's unplugged and you try to go back and figure out like who unplugged that lamp, like there's not a lot of evidence, there's nothing really to show like what happened. And he explained that it was kind of similar to what happened with Tyler's heart. The beautiful thing that the reason I mentioned the house that we were trying to buy and moving into the Snowbirds house and then moving out, we had moved out of the Snowbirds house and in with my parents, and like it was just this incredible blessing that I was going home to my parents' house and not to, Tyler and I's home. That now we have all these memories, and there were just little like things like that, blessings and kindnesses of God that you could see along the way. And so the house that we had the verbal agreement on, we actually were able to make an agreement on that house yet again, like in this whole time frame as well. And so we were supposed to close on it just weeks after Tyler ended up passing away. And so I had this decision, like, was I going to buy this house or not? Like, without him, this house was special to us. We got married on the land. We had our engagement pictures there. Like, it was a property in a land that we always loved. I had to decide, like, am I going to still move here? And it was still my dream, even though Tyler was gone. And so I did. I bought the house and we moved in just a few months after he passed. And that ended up being such a special place for me and the boys to kind of heal and have something for me to like pour my heart into, like just remodeling and making the place my own. And we still have the house now, and it's our happy place.
It is. I
We
love it.
absolutely love it.
So, my side of the story before I met Allie, I was a youth pastor for 15 years, as I mentioned before, and the first church I was a part of, I met a girl named Tiffany who was the life of the party, was always out front, was always big hair, all the things, and so we met and we were married. We led in the youth ministry together for about 10 years. And a little less than 10 years, and we actually had 5 children together, which was kind of crazy. That's most of my friends are like, what is wrong with you? We had people asking on a regular basis, this works, right? We're like, yeah, we know it works, leave us alone. Tiffany and I, we started the church in southern Minnesota, a little town called Northfield, Minnesota. It was awesome. It was great. It was like our dream together. And Northfield's this quintessential little town in southern Minnesota. The river runs through it. And there's this old historic downtown that we would walk to from our house. We called it the greenhouse. And it was about a 10-minute walk. And we'd walk down there, and life was wonderful. And life was beautiful. And the church we had started was going well. There was incredible people that we got a chance to be a part of their life and to encourage and to cheer on, and just a picturesque time in life. And I look back at those pictures now, like, when you're on your phone and all of a sudden, like, Apple is kind enough, your iPhone's kind enough to, like, show you a memory from like 12 years ago, and you see this, and I see our 5 children that were so small at the time. They're all grown now, and you're like, oh, brings me back to those moments. And it gets me right in the heart. And so life was great. And it was 2016 around Christmas. And Tiffany went in for a kind of a routine procedure. And the doctor came back and said, hey, we have some things we have to run past you, and found a lump in her breast and sent it off to autopsy. And he's like, I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure there's nothing there and it's good. And so we went into Christmas thinking that. And got a call. It was actually December 26th, 2016, and we got the news that there was cancer in that tumor. And so we were like taken aback. Tiffany was 33 years old, and she'd breastfed all 5 of our children, and all the things that you're told to do, she had done to not get breast cancer. And we're like, what do we do? And we prayed immediately. We're like, okay, God, give us wisdom, and what are we supposed to do? And we went down a natural, holistic route at first and felt really good about it until the holistic doc said, hey, I think this is too far. It's too aggressive, and it's progressed too far to fight it, battle it in this way. So I encourage you to pivot over to a normal oncology route. And so we did that. And in the process, there were so many mixed emotions. There's all the things, all the fear. We were trying to decide, what do we battle this privately or do we go publicly? So we actually, we announced it to the church. This is what we're battling. And we called 2016 kind of the year of battle, because we were battling like crazy and battling for Tiffany's life. And she had multiple surgeries, multiple levels of chemotherapy. And simultaneously, while we're battling cancer, we're also like building a building for the church. And so my life was in this weird space where it was like I would go spend like 4 hours in a chemotherapy room with my wife who was getting chemo, battling cancer, and then bring her home, tuck her in bed, make sure she's resting well, and then I would go to a fundraising event to try to raise funds for the building that we're building. And so 2016 was just a blur of a year for me. And even for me, it hit me in a really challenging way. And I remember towards the end of the year, I was just grinding so hard for so long and trying to get through this. And towards the end of the year, Tiffany had like 30 radiation treatments. And it was like just so horrific what it was doing to her body. But one day we're at home and one of the kids did something. I reacted immediately. And she looked at me, she said, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "There's nothing wrong with me." I'm like, "I'm fine." You know, sometimes when you have to see yourself through someone else's eyes because you have a blind spot. And a couple days later, one of the kids did something and I reacted and I saw it. I was like, what is wrong with me? And I just remember this time I was carrying so much and I was doing so much that it was affecting me mentally and emotionally. We got through 2016, we got to the end of it, and there was a clear bill of health. The doctors are like, we've ran the tests, the cancer's gone. We're like, yes. And so that was 2016, basically the entire year, or 2017, excuse me. And then 2018, it was like, we thought it was like, hey, this is our year of breakthrough, right? Like we're pushing past cancer. We actually had, the building was breaking ground. It was being remodeled. And so we got to move in there around, it was a remodeled space. We moved in around Memorial Day. Or June 1st, we're like, this is the greatest thing. And all of our friends were there to celebrate. It was just amazing and just an incredible experience. And from there, we saw the church continue to grow and to build. And in that time frame as well, I'm just throwing this in there, but I went to, I did a 100-hour kind of like boot camp thing for like non-military type people. And so I did this, and it was a buddy of mine. It was the best mental emotional breakthrough I'd ever done because I was struggling mentally and emotionally, and it was coming out, and I was literally bleeding on people that hadn't cut me. So that for me, it was a huge breakthrough, just getting to the point, putting myself in that space where I had a chance to heal and to grow from that. So that helped us in 2017 grow the church, and we saw the church grow numerically, and it was pretty incredible. And then that was 2018, and then towards the end of 2018, Tiffany would regularly go back in for checkups every quarter, and it was good. And then around early December of 2018, we just got some numbers that were kind of concerning, and the doctor wanted to talk to us, and we went back in after Christmas and found out that the cancer was back. And so now it's late 2018, early 2019, and we're back at it. And I remember the first time in 2017 when Tiffany was diagnosed with cancer, for some reason I didn't think that she would or could die. It just didn't hit me. It just didn't. But it was different this time. Immediately I was like, what does this mean? And we went back to a holistic path. We were living in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We flew to California to see a specialist there that was looking at her blood and saying there's still chemo in your blood over a year later, and talking about how we had to attack this at a cellular level. And so we immediately went into this really strict like eating diet protocol, and like it was like we were eating dirt, like literally. And I was like, I'm with you. I'll whatever you need to do. Like sometimes it's crazy to me when people are walking through such a health scare and they're like, well, I can't give up this. And I'm like, we'll give up anything for you to live, and walk through this process. And the damage that was done to our immune system in 2018, 2017, we couldn't get past. And so we found out in January, late December, early January, that the cancer is back, and in July of that year, Tiffany passed. And so that's coming up on 5 years. And it's kind of crazy to think about like how quickly life can change, and how quickly, you know, I left that June. I'd been with the church for over 9 years, and I left on sabbatical. I had a 9-week sabbatical, and I left on sabbatical June 1st and returned late September after being on bereavement leave. And I was gone for about 4 months from the church, and just trying to rebuild everything. And it's kind of crazy how quickly life can change and shift. And when we met, I remember it was probably the third date that we sat and we talked, third or fourth. And I was like, you didn't get to say goodbye. You didn't get to say goodbye. And I had nearly 3 years of goodbyes. And it was like, is this it? Is this not? And so it's just an interesting place where life can bring you, take you, lead you. And even the way, you know, Tyler passed and Tiffany passed, like Tyler was the best weekend of his life, and this was amazing, and at his favorite space, surrounded by his favorite people. And I know even for Tiffany, when she passed, like she was in a hospital room and surrounded by people that loved her, surrounded by her family and loved ones. And we were just all praying. Sunday afternoon, she passed, and that Friday afternoon, like 48 hours earlier, I was talking to my good friend Ivy Marsh, and I said, something has to happen in the next 24 hours. Either she's healed, like we believe that she could be supernaturally healed by God, or she's in heaven. And 48 hours later, she was in heaven. And what we walked through in that last 48 hours was excruciating. But I remember one moment, this was Saturday night, I'm laying on the floor, and I remember waking up thinking, God, if you would just heal my wife, I'll follow you the rest of my life. Even if you don't heal my wife, I'll follow you the rest of my life. But if you could, that'd be really great. It's just different when you look at it, because I could be like, God didn't heal her, and I'm so angry. But ultimately, she experienced ultimate healing. Like there's no more tears, there's no more death, there's no more sorrow. And we talk about it on a regular basis, like Tyler and Tiffany are where we all want to be.
Yep.
Right? Like they're the lucky ones. And it does feel like it was a different life ago, most days. So how we met. This is a fun story, right? So I was online dating, which if you're online dating and you're listening, I just want to just reach through the camera, give you a warm hug and say, I'm so sorry. There's so many crazy people on online dating. You're like, I'm just an authentic, real person looking for a connection, looking for maybe my next person, right? The person I want to like grow old with. And then you have crazy people that are like, hey, I will move across the country right now into your home with you and be your spouse. I'm like, I don't even know your middle name. I don't even know you. And then you had some craziness as well. People wanting to do things. You're like, what? But on the flip side, we also met on an online dating platform. And so we met on a platform called Christian Mingle, which it was one of the platforms I was on. I think it may be the only one you were on that I know of. We actually never really talked about this.
I was on others.
What? Are you for real? We never talked about this. Is this coming out live right now on YouTube? Like this, oh my goodness. Oh wow, we'll talk about this later. But so we're on this, and so I have a full profile on there, and here's my picture, and talk about like, I was just like, I'm authentic and real. Here's who I am. Like, let's not waste a bunch of time like with all these like, I don't want to say pleasantries, but just like all this like, I'm here on purpose, right? And so I'm simultaneously just getting really weary and tired of online dating. And so I see Allie's picture profile on there, and I was like, well, she's attractive. And there was a way you could respond. It was either like a winky face or like a thumbs up or like a kissy face. And I didn't want to be like, I didn't want to come across too strong. So I didn't do the kissy face. I did the winky face because this is like, hey, bro. But I was like, hey, wink, wink. And so I was like, well, we'll see what happens. Sure enough, Allie responded to my wink. It was pretty strong. Yeah. And so
I overthought.
it's so funny because someone just asked you if you're the overthinker in the relationship.
And I am,
here we are, full
and
circle.
I
You
did.
overthought.
I overthought what to say. So I ended up asking you about where you went to school for ministry.
Yeah. And so,
I was trying to be substantive.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And I appreciated that, but
clearly not enough because
so
he
just
never responded to my message.
Okay, that was my
Just
line.
never responded.
You're right, I didn't. And I apologize for that.
Ghosted me.
I've apologized multiple times.
Yeah.
But I was like so tired of this online dating thing. I unplugged every platform I was on, which was like 150 at that point. Yeah, it was managing so many things.
Okay, then.
And so I just unplugged and I was like, okay, God, whomever the next Mrs. Went is, that's her last name or my last name at the time, yours soon to be. I was like, I know you know who she is. And so I just felt like someone in one of my networks somewhere surely would know someone who was like, hey, you should meet Jeff. And so I just unplugged and I was like, done. And so I actually never responded to Allie.
Did.
Yeah, and that makes me look really bad. It
Perception's
actually
reality. Okay.
And it goes downhill from here. Okay, you go now. Okay, now it's your.
So, this is 2020, just to give you
Yeah.
a little context as well.
Yes.
So, I mean, meeting someone only really happens online at this point. Like,
Because you couldn't go anywhere or do anything,
Well,
or like, yeah, everything was like
it
school
was
was
summer,
online.
so yeah. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I had a friend come over. We were in small group together, and she was asking me about dating, and I was just telling her like, it's not great. Online dating is pretty awful. And I told her the only guy that I was excited about, because I had not met another person who had been through what I had been through. So I was especially excited about him because of that. But so I said verbatim to her, like, the only guy I was excited about was a pastor, a widower, and he was really cute. And she leans in and she goes, Jeff? And I was like, yeah.
Of course.
And so she grabs her phone, pulls up Facebook, and shows me his picture. And she's like, is this him? And I was like, yes, that was his exact profile picture. And she's like, I grew up with Jeff. I know him. I love him. You guys have to meet. Mm-hmm. She's like, you've been through these. And then she starts telling me his whole story and all the things. And so she just said, can I message him on Facebook and tell him that he has to connect with you? And I said, sure.
So, I get this message from this high school friend, Tana, and I was like, and she's asking, and my wife had passed a year earlier, and she's like, hey, are you interested in dating anyone? I was like, well, give me more detail, like what, and she's like, it's my friend named Allie. She's actually an incredible person. She lost her husband as well, so the two of you, even just getting together and chatting about like life, and she's like, I think you would really enjoy that, and sent me a picture of Allie, and I was like, yes, I think that would be great. I think I'd like to go grab a cup of coffee with her. And she said, oh, and by the way, you guys also met on Christian Mingle, but you never responded to her. I was like, I do remember. And she's like, can I send you her phone number? I was like, absolutely. So send me your phone number. And this was
probably late July. And so Tana got back to me and said, Jeff is interested in connecting. I sent him your information. And I was like, awesome. And then I didn't hear anything from him.
See, it makes me look so bad. And so
I was like, what is with this guy? And
seriously. And
I
you're
had
like,
been giving my family updates about,
yeah,
just dating. And Jeff was known as pastor guy with 5 kids within my family.
Yeah.
And so then it just became a little bit of this joke, like, well, pastor guy with 5 kids is not getting back to me.
Kind
and
of
that's okay.
ghosting a bit, kind of like, and you were like, what on earth? This is ridiculous. But simultaneously, you were dating. So it wasn't like, I'm just throwing that out there. Like,
Playing the field.
playing the field. I had pastor guy with 5 kids, and you were like 5 guys. And so anyways, so I'm just saying, so, so I went on this family road trip. I was like, okay, kids, we're going to go from Minneapolis to Utah. And I sent Tana a text. I said, hey, could you please let Allie know? I'll reach out to her when I get back. It makes me sound really bad, and it wasn't great. But I went on this road trip. I really wanted to be focused on the kids.
This was mid-August.
This was mid-August of 2020. And we get back, and my dad had passed away in May of that year of 2020. And in COVID season, you couldn't have any gatherings. And so we weren't able to have a funeral for him. And so when I'm in Utah, my mom texts me and says, hey, we're having the funeral tomorrow. And I was like, Mom, I'm in Utah right now, and I'm supposed to officiate. I can't do that. So can we bump it back? And so drove back and did my dad's funeral. And then the kids finally went back to school for the first time in like 10 months. And I'm sitting there all alone. I'm like, this is September already. They finally went back, and I sat there and I was like, well, what am I going to do with my life now? And so I actually thought to myself, I'm like, I should text Allie. And it was crazy. I got her number. It seemed like days earlier. Apparently it may have been months, but who's counting? So it's calendar months. It was July. It was like days. It was only days, just to be clear. And so I texted her. I said, hey, I'm so sorry it's taken me so long, but if you're still interested, I'd love to grab a cup of coffee with you and hear more about your story. And I was like, I hit send, and I was like, will I ever hear from this woman? And she actually responded immediately and said, I'd love to. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's awesome. And so this was a Wednesday, right? And I was like, you're like, what are you doing? You happen to have Friday off that next, 2 days later. And we went and grabbed coffee. And I remember, so the first moment, right? Your first, you can't really have the first impression. You can't really have that second opportunity. I was on a call with my buddy. I was waiting for Allie. Allie was a little late. And so, what you were, you just were. And it was funny because I was I bought a brand new outfit. I was dressed nice. And Allie just rolled out of painting her barn to come grab a cup of coffee with me. And I was looking great. And I was like, oh, you have paint on your hands. I was like, okay, that's fine. I see, just wear this. It's okay though. And so I'm on a call.
Just another date.
Just another date. That day, right? That day. Oh my gosh. At least I grabbed the lunch slot that day. So I was on the phone, on the call with my buddy Paul, and Allie walks up, and I see her, and I'm like, oh, see you, Paul. And I hung up and had my AirPods in, and it fell out, and it fell underneath this, I don't know, bookshelf or bench or something. So Allie's first view of me, was from behind, and she's like, oh, he's really bold. That's what runs through my mind.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, and then you came around, I saw you, and I was like, oh my God, she's beautiful. And then my AirPod drops, and I have to get down on my hands and knees with my butt sticking in the air to get my AirPod.
It was a good first impression.
That was bald head and big butt. And it was like, that's my boy, right? That was the beginning of it. And so that was our first date. And it started with coffee. Because we're like, hey, let's meet at 11 for coffee. Because then it could be if it wasn't going well, it was safe, right? You're like, oh, I have a lunch meeting I have to get to, or I have a 1 o'clock. And so we're trying to, safeguard that. And our coffee turned into lunch, which turned into sitting on a bench in Stillwater, Minnesota by the St. Croix River talking about life and Enneagram and all these things that we were into, personality profiles and whatnot, and realizing wow, this is actually pretty cool.
So things went really quick with us. We saw each other quite a bit in the first few weeks, but the first week we didn't see each other. I was legit working on my barn. But one thing that was just a little bit of a, I don't know, godsend special moment. We were texting back and forth a lot that week because we couldn't see each other. And part of my concern in dating or who I was going to marry was my boys. I didn't want somebody that was really into me and would just kind of take the boys because they had to, right? Like, I wanted someone who was really, really going to love my boys as their own and want them, like want to be their dad and want to have this family. And so that was a really big concern of mine, just because dating as a single mom with 2 little boys, like most people don't want to step into this unique situation. And so I was really concerned about that, especially because you already had 5 kids. And I'm like, gosh, I can't imagine somebody wanting more.
I can't either.
And so we were texting back and forth, and our texts like literally crossed. Like I had typed up, and of course this shouldn't be a text conversation, but it was, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I had typed up this message kind of like expressing my concern and just like my feeling, like really wanting someone who desires to be in Elijah and Amos's life and like be their dad. And so I had sent that message, and that like less than a second later, here comes your message in, and Jeff just saying like, I'm just so excited about Elijah and Amos. And like, I just have such a desire to be in their lives. And I feel like you were kind of saying, like, I feel like God has just given me this capacity for these 2 boys. Like, even though I already have 5, like, I want them.
I remember thinking about this because, like, I'd never thought of adopting. Like, I'd thought about it, but I never thought, like, adoption just wasn't for me. Like, I was like, we have 5 and we are good. And who, you know, when you have 5 kids, you don't really think about adding more. But then Tiffany passes and the whole landscape of my life changes. And I'm like, realistically, whatever happens next, like, there's going to be other children involved. And even thought, like, you know, what if we have more children? I was like, that's going to be crazy. And
it is.
And it is. But I remember with Elijah and Elijah, we call him Elijah and Amos is Ames. Just this connection with them. And we talked, and I remember the first time I ever FaceTimed him, right? Like, I had my hat on backwards. And then you sent me a picture immediately after we got off the phone, and they had turned their hats around backwards. And they're like, hey, they just talked to Jeff. And just this really cool moment. And that was like, coming up on, I mean, man, that was almost 4 years ago now. It's kind of crazy to think about. And even just yesterday, or this, yeah, it was on Monday, Tyler's, the 6-year anniversary of Tyler's passing. There's so many weird feelings that come around, like the anniversaries, you know, the birthdays or the anniversaries of passings or whatnot. And it's this weird thing. I'd never met Tyler, but I just know he was just an outstanding human being and just an amazing dude. I know his family. I love his family. But I'm kissing Elijah on the head, and I'm kissing Amos on the head, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, if Tyler doesn't pass, this doesn't happen. And if Tiffany doesn't pass, this doesn't happen. But here we are, fast forward years later, and we have this beautiful blended family with 7 children, and you and me, like, oh my gosh, 7 children. It's just the craziest thing how I never would have scripted my life this way, never would have imagined my life this way. But now I can't imagine my life different. I can't imagine it without Elijah in it, and without Amos in it, and without them running in, and this morning, Amos jumping and giving me a hug and calling me dad. And so it's...
Well, and even back to what I had mentioned, like having this picture in my head of like this large multiracial family. And it was like, as the years went by, that just seemed less and less like realistic to ever happen in my life. Even with me and Tyler, it's like, well, we can only adopt. Like, how are we going to adopt 5 or 6 kids? Like, financially, we can't do that, you know? And then Ty passed away, and I struggled to be a single mom. There was no part of me that even wanted any more kids. Like, that dream just seemed to die more and more, like, as life went on. And then I married Jeff.
Which honestly, like, I think about that, like, you had, I mean, back to how we met on Christian Mingle, I had a full paid for account. Like, I was in it and serious, and I was like, this is ROI, right? Return on my investment. I think it was like $20 a month. Anyways, you didn't.
Freeloader.
Yeah. You had the free version.
Yeah.
So you didn't even know I had 5 kids.
No, you had 5 kids at that time.
What?
But overnight,
so you weren't just a kid digger. Yeah.
Go from 2 to 7. I'm the mom to 3 different women's babies.
It's kind of crazy to think about.
It's kind of crazy.
And I
love
remember
what God can do.
Yeah, I mean, when you're dating and you have like 5 children. And I know like the Bible says children are a blessing from God, but in that moment, you're like, what is someone going to think about? You have 5 children. And here God uniquely weaved our story together to be like, you had this picture of what your family would be or could be. And the beauty of it is that like literally us coming together was the fruition of that picture. Pretty incredible. So that's our story.